This is something that is standard in the Indigenous community from coast to coast. Every Indigenous community speaks to something that we call, depending on who's talking, it's either the grandmother teachings or the grandfather teachings or the ancestral teachings. And these ancestral teachings are based upon an idea that if you apply these teachings in your day-to-day life, you will have a roadmap to a relatively good journey. And we know that the journey of life, which starts with from an insignificant, almost invisible dot that has a spark, as they say at conception, the medical community has identified that conception, there is a spark, which is an electromagnetic spark that happens, and the process of growth begins with that. So we get delivered into a world from our mothers, and into this world that we get delivered into is a magical place because it has the possibility of everything and nothing. So in that world, there were certain guides that the Indigenous community knew that if everybody followed them, that the journey would be much easier. And they went to the forest to find the evidence of these wisdoms. So when people often wonder, what is a food forest? Well, in the eastern part of the country here, we had the Carolinian forest. It was 7 canopies of growth of trees, and they all produced foods for us. So we called it a forest of food. And the old trees that were very tall and very sturdy and grew high and had a canopy that protected all the other vegetation underneath, these old trees were made up of the walnut trees, the oak trees, the beechnut trees, the maple trees, these huge, big old trees that shaded and protected all the other trees. Somewhere along the line, the Indigenous people recognized that a walnut tree, for instance, has a little walnut, and if you open it up, it looks like a little brain in there. And they said, well, this must be good for your mind. This is brain food. And guess what? Science today says you eat walnuts, it's good for your mental capacities. Also, maple syrup, the sap would run. They got the sap. That was something that was sweet. It wasn't refined sugar. From there, also maple syrup. Science today tells us that it's a great food for your mental capacities. So somewhere along the line, we recognized that these old trees represented wisdom. It was good for wisdom. It was good for the mind. These trees had wisdom. Well, what was that wisdom, canopy of wisdom protecting? The next canopy of food was all the fruit trees, the apple trees, the plum trees, the pear tree, trees that gave us fruit. But these trees were fragile often. They had to withstand incredible winters, difficult winters, hurricanes, windstorms, drought, but they would survive, and they navigated those changes in weather and everything, and they always gave fruit. So from those trees, we were able to share with our children, look at how wise the old trees are. Look at how brave the fruit trees are. They're so brave, they're so fragile, but look at the fruit they give us. Underneath that canopy of food was another canopy of bushes that were filled with berries. There was the raspberry, the blueberries, the thimbleberries, gooseberries, bearberries, all these berries. And what was curious about the berries is that they had all different tastes, all different textures, all different colors. And they were self-propagating, and they lived amongst each other. You get a raspberry there, a blueberry there, a gooseberry over here, and they seem to get along. So we learn respect from these bushes. Look at how they respect one another. It doesn't matter what color, what taste, how large, how small. They respect each other. They live together. They're in harmony. So now we got wisdom, we got courage, we got respect. And then we noticed that there was all kinds of food that was growing above the ground that animals were eating, that like tomatoes, cucumbers, lettuce, these foods that were obviously honest. There was nothing to worry about. They just told you that they were there, they were available, you could eat them, and they were honest. So we learned about honesty from the fact of transparency. Honesty and transparency go together. Then there were other foods that were right on the ground. This is where we got our medicines. The medicines were a different category because with the medicines, you had to get down and actually act like a scientist to separate the good medicines from the bad medicines. In other words, the good mushroom from the bad mushroom, from the toadstool, the good ivy from the poison ivy, the good oak from the bad oak, from the poison oak. We had to do that. We had to go through a process of separating one from the other, and we learned truth. Before you accept anything, do an examination. Separate the good from the bad, separate the right from the wrong, make these judgments and so on. And that way you will have the knowledge to carry yourself forward. And then we got all our medicines from there. We even found little strawberries that represented the heart of the human being. And we cherished these strawberries because they had little seeds on the outside of themselves. We said, wow, that's like the Mother Earth. We are the seeds of the Mother Earth. The strawberry is us. It represents the human being. It's us. We are the seeds on the outside of Mother Earth. We are the little seeds, and we will become universes when we grow up. So we learned about truth. Then there were other food that was buried under the ground, the tubers, potatoes, turnips, and radishes, and things that you had to dig them out, carrots. And when you dug them out, you had to get on your hands and knees to dig around in the earth to find this. We learned humility from that. And then we also noticed that through the forest were vines and ferns that embraced other plants. And we said, wow, look at that. Nature loves one another. It embraces one another. We must embrace each other the same way. So there, we had the 7 ancestral teachings, and we said, in any decision that you take, consider, is it made with love? Is there truth associated with the decision? Is there humility associated with the decision? Is there honesty associated with the decision? Is there courage associated with the decision? Is there wisdom associated with the decision you're going to make? And if all of those elements are associated and have a place in the decision, then the decision is a good one. But don't make any decision until you've fully examined whether all of these wisdoms are a part of the decision-making process. And sometimes you would get into conferences, like I've been to many powwows where someone makes a great speech and they talk about, we have to have the courage of our convictions and we have to fight for our rights and everything. And then they sit down and somebody else will get up and say, well, is there any humility in what you just said? And somebody else will get up and say, wait a second, did I hear any respect when you were talking about courage and bravery and fighting and everything? Was that in there? And then somebody else would say, at the end of the day, they'd say, well, where's the wisdom? And if it wasn't a part of the whole process, then it wouldn't be acted upon. And that's the reason that all decisions had to come back to the elders, because the elders would sit around, as I'm doing today, and say, well, okay, you want to go and barricade the railroads to stop the trains from running through your land, and that takes a lot of courage, but are you respecting the land when you do that? Is there honesty in what you're saying? Is there truth to what you're doing? And all of these things have to be answered. And at the end of the day, is there wisdom? And if all of those things connect and it's all there, then you go ahead with the decision process. But if it isn't, then you have to wait for a pandemic to come along to make sure that you're doing the right thing.